Dovetail Springs, Colorado Territory, 1871. The last snow of winter clung to the mountains that loomed over Dovetail Springs like ancient guardians. The pine forest whispered with secrets of the coming spring, but Sawyer Nightingale turned a deaf ear to such promises. The 25-year-old cowboy had learned long ago that hope was a luxury men like him could ill afford on the frontier. He adjusted the worn leather of his gloves as he guided his dappled gray mare down the muddy Main Street. Buildings of rough-hewn timber and weather-beaten planks lined both sides, a general store, livery, saloon, and the other necessities that constituted civilization in this remote corner of the West. 3 years working cattle for the Diamond Creek outfit had taught him that a man survived by keeping his head down, his opinions to himself, and his heart locked away. "A man's got no business dreaming out here," his pa had told him before consumption took him back in '62. "The West will eat your dreams faster than wolves on a fallen calf." Sawyer believed that truth down to his bones. The war had claimed his 2 older brothers, and the frontier had nearly broken what remained of his family before finally taking his mother 2 winters past. Since then, he drifted from ranch to ranch, building a reputation as a dependable hand who never caused trouble and never got too close. The false belief that had calcified around his heart was simple. Attachment was a weakness the frontier would exploit. Love was a luxury men like him couldn't afford. Better to be alone than to build something only to watch it crumble. A light rain began to fall as he dismounted before Fincher's general store. He'd been sent to town for supplies, salt, coffee, ammunition, and the other necessities the Diamond Creek required. The foreman had trusted him with a sizable sum, proof he'd earned his place among the crew. "Might as well get out of this wet," he muttered to himself, tying his mare to the hitching post. The bell above the door announced his entrance. The familiar smells of coffee beans, leather, tobacco, and dried goods greeted him as he removed his hat, shaking off the raindrops. Mr. Fincher, a stout man with spectacles perched on the end of his nose, looked up from his ledger. "Afternoon, Nightingale. Diamond Creek send you for the monthly order." "Yes, sir," Sawyer replied, reaching into his pocket for the list. That was when he noticed her. At the far counter stood a young woman, perhaps 21 or 22 years old. Her dress was faded blue calico, patched in several places but clean and carefully mended. What captivated Sawyer, however, was her hair, a cascade of honey blonde that fell nearly to her waist. Even in the dim light of the store, it seemed to catch what little sunshine filtered through the rain-streaked windows. She stood with her shoulders squared, speaking quietly but intently to Mr. Fincher's wife, who was examining something in her hands. It took Sawyer a moment to realize what was happening, and when he did, something inside him twisted uncomfortably. The young woman was holding a pair of shears. "Please, Mrs. Fincher," she said, her voice soft but determined. "I know it's worth something. Women back east pay good money for hair like this. I've kept it clean. I just need enough for bread and milk, just to get through until I find work." Mrs. Fincher's face was a mask of sympathetic reluctance. "Miss Ellison, I'm truly sorry. In Denver or San Francisco, perhaps, but out here. We've no way to sell it, dear." The young woman, Miss Ellison, clutched the shears tighter. "There must be something you can trade, anything. My little brother hasn't eaten since yesterday morning." Sawyer found himself moving forward before he'd made a conscious decision to do so. Something about her dignified desperation pierced through the armor he'd built around himself. "Ma'am," he said, his voice coming out rougher than he intended. Both women turned to him, startled. "Beggin' your pardon for interrupting." Up close he could see her eyes were the clear green of mountain lakes, now widened with surprise and perhaps a touch of wariness. Her face was pale with hunger, but beautiful nonetheless, with high cheekbones and a determined chin. A faint dusting of freckles crossed her nose, evidence of days spent outdoors. "I couldn't help overhearing," he continued, feeling unusually awkward. "That hair of yours, it seems a shame to part with it when you don't have to." Her expression hardened. "I don't accept charity, sir." Sawyer nodded, respecting her pride even as he admired the stubborn lift of her chin. "Not offering charity. Diamond Creek Ranch needs a cook's helper. the old man we had moved on last month. Pays fare, room and board plus $5 weekly. It was a partial truth. They'd been making do without a dedicated helper, with the hands taking turns assisting Cookie. But he knew the foreman had mentioned wanting to hire someone soon enough. The offer includes your brother, he added, seeing the hesitation in her eyes. Mrs. Fincher's face broke into a smile. Oh, Miss Ellison, what a perfect solution. The Diamond Creek is a respectable outfit. Mr. Porter runs a clean operation. The young woman studied Sawyer, suspicion warring with desperation in her gaze. Why would you help strangers? It was a fair question, one Sawyer wasn't entirely sure he could answer. He shifted uncomfortably under her scrutiny. Keep your hair, ma'am, he said simply. I'll feed you both. The ranch needs the help and you need the work. Seems straightforward enough. For several long seconds she said nothing, and Sawyer wondered if he'd overstepped. Then she carefully set the shears on the counter, her shoulders relaxing slightly. My name is Stella Ellison, she said, her voice steadier now. My brother Samuel is 10 years old. We've been on our own since my husband died at Chimney Rock 3 months ago. Our wagon train continued west, but I couldn't. We had to turn back, ran out of funds in Dovetail. Sawyer Nightingale, he replied with a slight nod. I ride for Diamond Creek. If you're agreeable, we can settle your account with the Finchers, gather your brother, and head to the ranch today. It's 8 miles out, and the rain's likely to get worse. Relief flickered across her face, though she maintained her dignified composure. We have very little to gather. We've been staying in the back room of the church, by Reverend Wallace's charity. I'll settle up here and meet you there in 30 minutes. She nodded, and as she moved past him toward the door, the scent of lavender briefly reached him, a small luxury she'd somehow maintained despite her circumstances. The bell jangled as she left, and Sawyer found himself staring after her. That was a kindness, Mr. Nightingale, Mrs. Fincher said, breaking his reverie. The poor dear's been through so much. Just practical, Sawyer muttered, uncomfortable with the praise. Ranch needs help. But as he completed his transactions and arranged for the supplies to be delivered to the ranch later that week, he couldn't help wondering what he'd just gotten himself into. His carefully constructed solitude was about to be disrupted by a widow and her brother. The Diamond Creek bunkhouse was no place for a woman, which meant she and the boy would likely take the small cabin near the main house, normally reserved for married hands. And Mr. Porter, while a fair man, might not appreciate Sawyer making hiring decisions without consultation. Still, he couldn't bring himself to regret the impulsive offer, not when it meant saving that glorious honey-blonde hair and putting food in the belly of a hungry child. An hour later, they were on the trail to Diamond Creek Ranch. Stella rode behind Sawyer on his mare, her arms tentatively circling his waist, while young Samuel rode double with one of the ranch hands who'd accompanied Sawyer to town. The boy was small for 10, with the same blonde hair as his sister, though his was cropped short. His clothes hung from his thin frame, testament to their difficult journey and recent hardship. The rain had settled into a steady drizzle, and Sawyer was acutely aware of Stella's warmth against his back. She held herself rigidly, clearly uncomfortable with their physical proximity, but having no alternative. For his part, Sawyer kept his eyes fixed on the muddy trail ahead, trying to ignore the unfamiliar feeling stirring within him. My husband Thomas was a schoolteacher, Stella said suddenly, her voice barely audible over the rain and the horse's hooves. He had dreams of starting a school in Oregon Territory. Said the frontier needed education as much as it needed guns and plows. Sawyer nodded, unsure how to respond. Cholera took him so fast, she continued. 3 days from first symptoms to the end. I never thought I'd be a widow at 22. The vulnerability in her voice made something twist in Sawyer's chest. I'm sorry, he said simply. I don't know why I'm telling you this, she admitted with a small, embarrassed laugh. I suppose I want you to understand that we weren't always this desperate. Thomas and I had plans. Dreams. Dreams don't often survive out here, Sawyer said before he could stop himself. He felt her stiffen slightly behind him. Perhaps not, but people do, and as long as we're living, seems to me we ought to have something to live for beyond mere survival." Her words disturbed him more than he cared to admit. What had he been living for these past years, if not mere survival? The thought was uncomfortable enough that he remained silent for the rest of the journey, pondering the unexpected wisdom of the hungry widow who'd nearly traded her beautiful hair for bread. Diamond Creek Ranch spread across several thousand acres of Colorado Territory's finest grazing land. The main house, a substantial two-story structure built of sturdy logs, stood on a gentle rise overlooking corrals, a barn, bunkhouse, cookhouse, and various outbuildings. A creek bordered by diamond-leafed cottonwoods gave the ranch its name, winding through the property like a silver ribbon. As they approached, Sawyer felt a strange mixture of pride and nervousness. He'd never brought anyone to the ranch before, and seeing it through Stella's eyes made him suddenly aware of both its rugged beauty and its rough-hewn edges. "It's lovely," she said softly, and he could hear the genuine appreciation in her voice. Samuel, riding ahead with the other hand, had perked up considerably at the sight of the buildings and the small herd of horses in the nearest corral. The resilience of children never ceased to amaze Sawyer. Just the promise of shelter and food had brought color back to the boy's cheeks. "Mr. Porter will want to meet you," Sawyer explained as they neared the main house. "He's fair but particular, runs a tight operation." "I understand," Stella replied, her voice taking on that determined quality he was coming to recognize. "I'm not afraid of hard work, Mr. Nightingale." "Just Sawyer," he corrected her. "No need for formalities out here." They dismounted near the barn, and Sawyer helped Stella down, careful to maintain a respectful distance once her feet touched the ground. Samuel hurried to his sister's side, his eyes wide as he took in their surroundings. "Are there Indians?" the boy asked, his voice a mixture of fear and excitement. "The Ute pass through occasionally," Sawyer answered honestly. "But there's been peace in these parts for some years now. They trade with us sometimes." "Samuel has an interest in native peoples," Stella explained with a fond smile at her brother. "He collects stories about them." Sawyer nodded, then gestured toward the main house. "Let's get you introduced to Mr. Porter." Garrett Porter was in his 50s, with iron-gray hair and the weathered face of a man who'd spent his life outdoors. His blue eyes were sharp beneath bushy brows, and they missed nothing as Sawyer explained the situation. To Sawyer's relief, the ranch owner didn't immediately object to the arrangement. "We've been short-handed in the cookhouse," Porter acknowledged, studying Stella with an appraising but respectful gaze. "Cookie's getting on in years and could use the help, especially with spring roundup coming. The boy can make himself useful too, collecting eggs, feeding the chickens." "Thank you, sir," Stella said. "We won't disappoint you." Porter nodded. "Nightingale, show them to the small cabin. It needs airing out, but it's sound. Miss Ellison, you can start in the morning. I imagine you and your brother could use some rest and a proper meal tonight." As they left the main house, Sawyer could feel some of the tension leaving Stella's shoulders. "He seems fair," she observed quietly. "He is," Sawyer confirmed. "Expects honest work for honest pay, but he's not one to drive his people beyond reason." The small cabin sat about 50 yards from the main house, partially sheltered by a stand of pines. It was a simple one-room structure with a small porch but solidly built and weathertight. Inside was basic but clean: a small iron stove for heat and cooking, a rough wooden table with 2 chairs, a narrow bed in one corner, and a trundle that could be pulled out from beneath it. "It's not much," Sawyer said, suddenly seeing the cabin's limitations through Stella's eyes. To his surprise, she smiled, a genuine expression that transformed her face and made his breath catch unexpectedly. "It's perfect," she said simply. "Our own roof, our own place." Samuel had already claimed the trundle bed, bouncing experimentally on its thin mattress. "Can I go see the horses after dinner?" he asked eagerly. "We'll see," Stella replied, the caution of a guardian evident in her tone. "We need to learn the rules here first, Samuel." Sawyer found himself wanting to reassure them both. The horses would probably appreciate the attention. Some of them don't get handled as often as they should. The boy's face lit up, and Stella gave Sawyer a grateful look that made something unfamiliar stir in his chest. "I'll have someone bring water and firewood," he said, suddenly eager to be away from the unfamiliar emotions their presence evoked. "Dinner's at sunset in the cookhouse. I'll come fetch you." As he stepped back outside into the drizzling rain, Sawyer took a deep breath of the pine-scented air. What had possessed him to bring them here? His carefully ordered existence now had complications he hadn't planned for: a beautiful widow with eyes like mountain lakes, and a determination that both impressed and unsettled him, plus a boy who would inevitably ask questions and demand attention. Yet something about their presence felt oddly right, as if they belonged at Diamond Creek in a way he couldn't quite explain. It was a dangerous thought, one that contradicted everything he believed about attachment and survival on the frontier. Just temporary, he reminded himself as he headed toward the bunkhouse. Just until they get on their feet. But even as he thought it, some deeper part of him recognized the falsehood for what it was. Something had changed the moment he saw Stella Ellison prepared to sacrifice her beautiful hair for bread, something fundamental that he wasn't ready to examine too closely. The next morning dawned clear and bright, as if the previous day's rain had washed the world clean. Sawyer rose before sunrise, as was his habit, and made his way to the cookhouse. To his surprise, he found Stella already there, her honey-blonde hair neatly braided and pinned at the nape of her neck. She wore the same patched blue dress, but had added a clean white apron borrowed from somewhere. She was kneading dough with practiced movements, her sleeves rolled up to reveal slender forearms. Cookie, a grizzled old cowhand named Jeremiah who turned to cooking after a bronc had shattered his leg years ago, was showing her the layout of the cookhouse with obvious approval. "Morning," Sawyer said, suddenly feeling awkward in the doorway. Stella looked up, a light dusting of flour on one cheek. "Good morning," she replied, her voice warmer than he'd heard it yet. A good night's sleep and the promise of regular meals had already begun to soften the desperate edge he'd first encountered. "Miss Ellison here's already proving her worth," Cookie declared. "Got a natural touch with bread dough, says she can make pies too." "My mother taught me," Stella explained with a modest shrug. "And I kept house for Thomas after we married." "Where's your brother?" Sawyer asked, accepting the cup of coffee Cookie handed him. Still sleeping, poor thing was exhausted. A shadow crossed her face. "We've been walking more than riding since Chimney Rock. The wagon master could only spare us one mule and our few possessions when we turned back." The thought of Stella walking hundreds of miles with a 10-year-old boy, recently widowed and increasingly desperate, made Sawyer's jaw tighten. The frontier was merciless to those without resources, especially women alone. "He'll be all right here," Sawyer found himself saying. "Plenty of fresh air and food. Boys grow fast with both." Her smile of gratitude hit him with unexpected force. "Thank you, Sawyer, for everything." He nodded awkwardly and retreated to a table with his coffee, watching as she returned to her work. There was a grace to her movements, even in such mundane tasks, that drew his eye. Cookie gave him a knowing look that Sawyer pretended not to notice. The next weeks fell into a rhythm that felt surprisingly natural. Stella proved herself invaluable in the cookhouse, her skills extending beyond bread and pies to hearty stews and creative ways to make the most of limited ingredients. The ranch hands, initially wary of having a woman in their midst, quickly became her champions when they tasted her cooking. Samuel, meanwhile, blossomed in the ranch environment. His natural curiosity and eagerness to help endeared him to everyone from the stable hands to Mr. Porter himself. The boy had a way with horses that suggested he might make a fine horseman someday, and he followed Sawyer around whenever possible, peppering him with questions about ranch life. "Why do you burn the mark into the cows?" Samuel asked one afternoon as he watched Sawyer repair a bridle outside the barn. "So everyone knows which ranch they belong to," Sawyer explained patiently. "Otherwise, when they mix with other herds on the open range, we wouldn't know which were ours." "Does it hurt them bad?" Sawyer considered the question seriously. "It hurts some. But it's quick, and it keeps them from getting stolen or lost." Samuel nodded thoughtfully. Like how Mama kept our family Bible even though it was heavy to carry, so we wouldn't lose where we came from. The simple wisdom in the child's words gave Sawyer pause. What marks did people carry to show where they belonged? What did it mean to truly belong somewhere? These thoughts troubled him as April turned to May and the ranch prepared for spring roundup. The days grew longer and warmer, and the hills turned emerald with new growth. Stella had settled into her role with quiet confidence, and Sawyer found himself inventing reasons to visit the cookhouse or to pass by the small cabin in the evenings. He told himself he was merely checking on their welfare, ensuring his impulsive hiring decision continued to benefit the ranch. But the truth, which he was reluctant to acknowledge even to himself, was that he found peace in Stella's presence that he'd never expected to find. One evening, about a month after their arrival, Sawyer found Stella sitting alone on the cabin's small porch. Samuel was already asleep inside, exhausted from a day spent helping with the horses. The sunset painted the western sky in shades of gold and crimson, and the first stars were beginning to appear in the darkening eastern horizon. "May I join you?" Sawyer asked, stopping at the bottom step. Stella looked up, a small smile touching her lips. She had filled out a little in the past weeks, her face less gaunt, though still bearing the delicate beauty that had first caught his attention. "Please do." He sat beside her on the rough-hewn bench, leaving a respectful distance between them. For a time, they simply watched the colors shift and deepen in the sky. "Samuel adores you," she said eventually, breaking the comfortable silence. "He talks about you constantly. Sawyer showed me how to saddle a horse. Sawyer says the Ute Indians know the best fishing spots. Sawyer can throw a rope better than anyone." Sawyer felt his ears grow warm. "He's a good boy, quick learner." "He never knew his father," Stella continued, her voice softer now. "He was born after my father passed. And Thomas, well, they had so little time together before." Her voice trailed off. "You've done well by him," Sawyer said, wanting to ease the sadness he heard in her voice. "He's got a good heart. That comes from how he was raised." In the fading light, he saw her eyes shimmer with unshed tears. "I was so afraid I would fail him. After Thomas died, it seemed like every decision I made only led us deeper into trouble. Turning back from the wagon train, running out of money here. When you found me in that store, I was at the end of myself." The vulnerability in her admission moved him. Without thinking, he reached out and covered her hand with his own. Her skin was warm and soft despite the calluses that spoke of hard work. "You would have found a way," he said with quiet conviction. "You're stronger than you know, Stella." She turned her hand beneath his, their fingers intertwining with a naturalness that startled them both. For several heartbeats, neither moved nor spoke. "What happened to your family?" she asked finally. "You've never mentioned them." Sawyer considered deflecting the question, as he usually did when the other hands got too curious about his past. But something about the gathering dusk and Stella's gentle presence made him want to answer honestly. "Pa died of consumption in '62. My brothers Jacob and Matthew died in the war, one at Antietam, one at Cold Harbor. Ma held on until 2 winters ago, then pneumonia took her." The words felt rusty with disuse, but once started, they seemed to flow more freely. "After that, there didn't seem much point in staying in Missouri. Came west, been drifting from ranch to ranch since." Stella's fingers tightened around his. "I'm sorry, that's a heavy burden of loss to carry." "Figured it was safer not to put down roots again," he admitted. "Can't lose what you don't have." In the near darkness, he could just make out her profile as she turned to look at him. Is that really living, though, or just existing? The question hit too close to the truth he'd been avoiding. Before he could formulate a response, the cookhouse bell rang, signaling that Cookie needed Stella's assistance with something. She withdrew her hand reluctantly. "I should go see what he needs." Sawyer nodded, both relieved and disappointed at the interruption. "Of course." As she stood to leave, she hesitated, then leaned down and placed a soft kiss on his cheek. "Thank you for talking with me, Sawyer." "Truly talking." Then she was gone, hurrying toward the cookhouse, leaving Sawyer with the ghost of her touch on his skin and her question echoing in his mind. Is that really living, though, or just existing? For the first time in years, he wasn't certain of the answer. Spring roundup began the following week, taking Sawyer and most of the hands away from the ranch for days at a time as they gathered cattle scattered across Diamond Creek's vast range. It was exhausting work, riding from sunrise to sunset, sleeping under the stars, eating meals from Cookie's chuck wagon, and waking stiff and sore to do it all again. Sawyer welcomed the physical demands and the distance they placed between himself and the confusing emotions Stella stirred in him. Out on the range, life was simpler. A man knew what was expected of him. The dangers were clear and present: ornery steers, unpredictable weather, the risk of injury far from medical help. These were threats he understood, unlike the vulnerable feeling that had crept into his chest that evening on Stella's porch. Yet even as he worked, her words followed him. Is that really living, though, or just existing? You're mighty thoughtful today, Nightingale, observed Derek Harrison, one of the older hands, as they rode side by side on the fourth day, pushing a small group of cattle toward the gathering grounds. Sawyer shrugged, just focused on the job. Harrison chuckled, the sound almost lost beneath the lowing of cattle and the creaking of saddle leather. Sure about that. Thought maybe you might be thinking about a certain blonde-haired widow back at the ranch. Sawyer stiffened. Don't know what you're talking about. Course you don't, Harrison replied with easy sarcasm. That's why you've been riding past her cabin every evening and finding reasons to linger in the cookhouse. Pure coincidence, I'm sure. Heat rose in Sawyer's face that had nothing to do with the spring sunshine. She's a respectable woman who's had a hard time, just making sure she and the boy are settling in proper. Harrison's expression sobered. No need to get defensive. She is a fine woman, brave too, from what I hear about her journey. A man could do worse. Sawyer didn't respond, instead urging his horse ahead to cut off a steer trying to break away from the group. But Harrison's words stayed with him, along with the uncomfortable realization that his interest in Stella hadn't gone unnoticed by the other hands. That evening, as they sat around the campfire after a meal of beans, salt pork, and Stella's biscuits, which Cookie had brought from the ranch, the conversation turned to the upcoming 4th of July celebration. Dovetail Springs and the surrounding ranches traditionally gathered for a community picnic, dancing, and contests of skill. Heard the Rocking M outfit is planning to challenge us at horseshoes again this year, said young Billy Watson, at 19 the youngest of the hands. And Ellis says his daughter's apple pies will beat anything Dovetail Springs can produce. Ha, Cookie snorted from his position by the chuck wagon. Wait till they taste Miss Ellison's pies. That woman has a touch with pastry that make angels weep. Speaking of Miss Ellison, Harrison said with deliberate casualness, reckon she'll be looking for a dancing partner at the celebration. Several of the men exchanged knowing glances, and Sawyer felt his shoulders tense. Pretty woman like that won't lack for offers, observed Martin Green, another of the hands. Widow or not, especially with hair like spun gold. Enough, Sawyer said sharply, surprising himself with the edge in his voice. Miss Ellison deserves respect, not gossip. A brief silence fell over the camp, broken only by the crackle of the fire and the distant lowing of cattle. Then Cookie chuckled. Well now, he said, his rheumy eyes twinkling with amusement, seems our Sawyer's got himself a soft spot after all. The men laughed good-naturedly, and Sawyer forced himself to join in, though his mind was churning. Did he have a soft spot for Stella? The very idea contradicted everything he'd come to believe about survival on the frontier. Attachment was vulnerability. Caring too deeply only ensured greater pain when the inevitable loss came. Yet as he rolled into his bedroll later, staring up at the vast canopy of stars, he couldn't deny the truth any longer. Somehow, without his permission or awareness, Stella Ellison had slipped past his defenses. Her quiet strength, her devotion to her brother, her remarkable resilience in the face of devastating loss, all had combined to awaken feelings he'd thought long buried. The realization terrified him. 2 days later, spring roundup concluded, and the hands returned to the ranch with nearly 2,000 head of cattle counted, branded, and ready for the summer grazing. As they rode in, tired and dust-covered, Sawyer caught sight of Stella in the cookhouse doorway, shading her eyes against the late afternoon sun. Samuel stood beside her, bouncing with excitement. The boy broke away and ran toward the returning riders as soon as he spotted Sawyer. "Did you see any outlaws? Were there wolves?" Cookie said sometimes wolves follow the cattle. Sawyer couldn't help but smile as he dismounted, his aches and weariness momentarily forgotten. "No outlaws this time, but we did see a wolf pack on the North Ridge. Kept their distance, though." Samuel's eyes widened with delight at this confirmation of adventure. "Can I come next time? I can help. I've been practicing my riding every day while you were gone." Before Sawyer could respond, Stella joined them, her expression a mixture of amusement and maternal caution. "Samuel, let Mr. Nightingale at least unsaddle his horse before you interrogate him." "It's all right," Sawyer assured her, suddenly acutely aware of how filthy he must appear after days on the trail. The boy's got a natural curiosity. That's good in ranch country. Stella's eyes met his, and he was struck again by their remarkable clarity, like mountain pools reflecting the summer sky. "Welcome back," she said softly. "We missed you around here." The simple statement, delivered with such unguarded sincerity, caught him off guard. Thank you," he managed. "How have things been?" "Quiet," she replied, "but good, mister. Porter has been teaching Samuel to fish in the creek, and I've been experimenting with new recipes. In fact," she hesitated, then seemed to make up her mind about something, "I made a special dinner to welcome everyone back. Nothing fancy, but better than trail food, I imagine." "That sounds wonderful," Sawyer said, meaning it. The thought of Stella's cooking after days of Cookie's functional but basic trail fare made his mouth water. "Perhaps after you've had a chance to clean up and rest, you might join Samuel and me at the cabin," she continued, a faint blush coloring her cheeks. "I made enough for 3. The invitation hung between them, weighted with meaning beyond the simple sharing of a meal. Sawyer was acutely aware of the other hands nearby, unsaddling their horses and no doubt watching this exchange with interest. "I'd be honored," he said finally, his voice rougher than he intended. Her smile in response was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. 7 o'clock then. Sawyer nodded and she turned to go, calling for Samuel to help her finish the preparations. The boy gave Sawyer one more excited grin before racing after his sister. "Well, well," came Harrison's amused voice from behind him. "Special dinner, is it? Better wash behind your ears, Nightingale." Sawyer threw him a warning glance, but couldn't muster any real annoyance. The prospect of dinner with Stella and Samuel had kindled a warmth in his chest that no amount of teasing could diminish. Later that evening, freshly bathed and wearing his cleanest shirt, Sawyer approached the small cabin with an unfamiliar nervousness fluttering in his stomach. He'd even trimmed his light stubble and attempted to tame his unruly dark hair, efforts that had earned more good-natured ribbing from the bunkhouse. The door opened before he could knock, revealing Samuel's eager face. "Sawyer, come in. Mama made fried chicken and apple pie, and mashed potatoes with gravy." "Samuel," came Stella's gently chiding voice from within, "let our guest at least cross the threshold before you recite the entire menu." Sawyer stepped inside, immediately enveloped by the mouth-watering aromas that filled the small space. The cabin had been transformed in subtle ways since his last visit. A patchwork quilt now covered the narrow bed, and wildflowers brightened the rough wooden table, which had been set with the ranch's everyday dishes but arranged with evident care. A small oil lamp cast a warm glow over the scene. Stella stood by the stove, wearing the blue calico dress he remembered from their first meeting, but it had been altered to fit her better, taken in at places where hunger had previously left her too thin. Her hair was arranged in a simple but elegant knot at the nape of her neck, with a few honey-colored tendrils framing her face. "Welcome," she said, and something in her voice made the simple words sound like coming home. The meal that followed was the most pleasant Sawyer could remember in years. Samuel dominated much of the conversation, eagerly sharing all that had happened during the roundup days and demanding stories of what Sawyer had seen and done. Stella intervened occasionally to remind her brother to eat between questions, her eyes twinkling with fond indulgence. The food was everything Samuel had promised and more. The chicken perfectly crisp outside and tender within, the potatoes whipped to creamy smoothness, the gravy rich and savory. But what struck Sawyer most was the atmosphere, the warmth, the laughter, the sense of connection that had been missing from his life for so long. "This is the best meal I've had in memory," he said sincerely, as Stella served slices of apple pie golden with cinnamon and sugar. She lowered her eyes, pleased. "It's nothing special, really, but I wanted to thank you for everything. When I think of where Samuel and I might be if you hadn't offered us a place here." She shook her head, unable to complete the thought. "The ranch is better for having you," Sawyer replied. "Both of you," he added with a nod to Samuel, who beamed around a mouthful of pie. After they'd eaten, Samuel reluctantly went to bed at his sister's insistence, though not before extracting a promise from Sawyer to take him riding the next day. Once the boy was settled on his trundle, Stella motioned to the porch. "Some coffee," she suggested quietly. "It's a lovely evening." Outside, the first stars had appeared in the deepening blue of the sky. A gentle breeze carried the scent of pine and distant sage. They sat on the small bench as they had once before, but this time the silence between them felt charged with unspoken possibilities. "I've been thinking about what you asked me," Sawyer said finally, staring into the darkness. "About whether I was really living or just existing." Stella turned toward him, her profile silvered by the emerging moonlight. "And I think," he hesitated, searching for the right words. "I think I forgot how to live after Ma died, maybe even before that. The war took so much from so many, then the frontier took more. Seemed easier to stop expecting anything good." Her hand found his in the darkness, their fingers interlacing with the same natural ease as before. "I understand that. After Thomas died, there were days I wondered why I should bother going on, if not for Samuel." She took a deep breath. "But then I realized that surrendering to despair would mean they'd all died for nothing, my parents, Thomas. The best way to honor them was to keep living, really living, not just surviving." Her words resonated with a truth Sawyer had been avoiding. He tightened his grip on her hand. "You're a remarkable woman, Stella Ellison." "I'm just someone who's trying to find her way," she replied softly. "Same as you." Without conscious thought, Sawyer found himself leaning closer to her. She didn't pull away. In the silver moonlight, her eyes searched his, seeking something he hoped she found. "Stella," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion he'd kept contained for too long. "Yes," she answered simply. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, questioning. But when her free hand came up to rest against his cheek, something broke loose inside him. He drew her closer, deepening the kiss as years of carefully constructed barriers crumbled beneath the simple, profound truth of her in his arms. When they finally parted, both breathless, Stella rested her forehead against his. "I never expected this," she confessed. "When Thomas died, I thought that part of my life was over." "I never expected you," Sawyer replied honestly. "Never thought I'd want anyone close again." She pulled back slightly to study his face. "And now?" The question demanded truth, and for once, Sawyer didn't shy away from it. "Now I can't imagine going back to how it was before." "Before you and Samuel, before," he gestured between them, unable to fully articulate the transformation that had occurred. A smile of transcendent beauty bloomed on her face. "Neither can I." They talked long into the night, voices hushed to avoid waking Samuel, sharing pieces of themselves that had long remained hidden. Stella spoke of her childhood in Illinois, her brief courtship with Thomas, their dreams of a new life in Oregon. Sawyer told her about growing up in Missouri, his brother's boisterous rivalry, the devastating impact of the war on their community. The moon had traveled far across the sky when Sawyer finally rose to leave. "I should let you rest," he said reluctantly. Stella walked with him to the bottom of the porch steps. "Will I see you tomorrow?" "Samuel will be heartbroken if you forget your promise to take him riding." "Wild horses couldn't keep me away," Sawyer assured her, then grinned at his own unintentional pun. She laughed softly, the sound like music in the quiet night. Good night, then, Sawyer Nightingale. He leaned down to kiss her once more, marveling at how natural it felt. Good night, Stella. As he walked back to the bunkhouse, Sawyer's mind was clearer than it had been in years. The deep-rooted belief that had governed his life, that attachment was a weakness the frontier would exploit, suddenly seemed like a prison he'd built for himself rather than a protection. Yes, the frontier was harsh. Yes, loss was inevitable, but in avoiding the risk of pain, he'd also denied himself the possibility of joy. Stella and Samuel had shown him that even here, even amid the unforgiving landscape of the West, connection was not just possible but essential. The realization both terrified and exhilarated him. June brought warmer days and the first hint of the summer heat to come. Diamond Creek Ranch settled into a steady rhythm as the cattle fattened on the lush grass of the high country, and preparations began for the cattle drive that would take place after the 4th of July celebration. Sawyer divided his time between his regular duties and increasingly frequent visits to Stella and Samuel's cabin. The three of them often took rides together on Sundays, exploring the beautiful country around the ranch. Sometimes they would picnic by the creek that gave the ranch its name, Samuel splashing in the shallows while Sawyer and Stella talked quietly on the bank. Their growing closeness did not go unnoticed. Mr. Porter called Sawyer into his office one afternoon in mid-June, fixing him with a shrewd look. "Nightingale," he said without preamble, "you've been with Diamond Creek for 3 years now." "Yes, sir," Sawyer replied, uncertain of the foreman's direction. "Been a good hand, reliable, keep to yourself mostly." Porter leaned back in his chair. "Until recently." Sawyer felt heat rise in his face, but met the older man's gaze steadily. "If you're referring to Miss Ellison, sir, my intentions are honorable." A smile cracked Porter's weathered face. "Figured as much, not blind, boy, seen how you look at her, seen how she looks at you too." He stroked his graying mustache thoughtfully. "Got me thinking, married hands tend to stick around longer, more stable. Diamond Creek could use stability." Sawyer blinked, taken aback by the unexpected turn in the conversation. "Sir." "The old Wilson place," Porter continued, as if Sawyer had understood his meaning perfectly. "That 40 acres on the north boundary, good water, decent pasture. Cabin needs work but the foundation's solid." It took Sawyer a moment to grasp what the foreman was suggesting. "You're offering me land." "Offering you a future, son," Porter corrected, "if you want it. Could use a man I trust running that section, keeping an eye on the north boundary. Would mean you'd have a place of your own, place for a family." The possibility struck Sawyer with the force of revelation. A place of his own. A future with Stella and Samuel, not just existing but building something lasting. "I don't know what to say, sir," he admitted. Porter waved a hand dismissively. "Don't say anything yet, think on it, talk to the lady. Let me know before the cattle drive." He gave Sawyer a knowing look. "And if I were you, I wouldn't wait too long to speak your mind. Woman like that won't lack for suitors if word gets around she's receptive." The thought sent an unexpected surge of jealousy through Sawyer, though he knew Stella had given him no reason to doubt her feelings. Still, Porter's words resonated with an urgency he couldn't ignore. If he wanted a future with Stella and Samuel, he needed to find the courage to reach for it. That evening, as the sun sank toward the western mountains in a blaze of gold and crimson, Sawyer walked to Stella's cabin with his mind churning. Samuel was spending the night with Billy Watson's younger brother in the main house, a friendship that had developed naturally over the past weeks, leaving Sawyer and Stella alone for the evening. She greeted him with the warm smile that never failed to quicken his pulse, drawing him inside where she had prepared a simple supper. They ate together, talking easily about the day's events, but Stella seemed to sense his preoccupation. "You're somewhere else tonight," she observed as they cleared the dishes together. "Is everything all right?" Sawyer hesitated, then decided directness was best. "Porter called me in today, made me an offer." A shadow crossed her face. "You're leaving?" "No," he said quickly, taking her hands in his. "The opposite, he offered me land, the old Wilson place on the north boundary, 40 acres with water rights and a cabin that needs work. So Diamond Creek needs stable married hands." Stella's eyes widened as she grasped his meaning. Sawyer. I know it's sudden, he continued, the words tumbling out now that he'd begun. And maybe I'm getting ahead of myself. But these past weeks with you and Samuel, they've changed everything, Stella. I thought I knew what it meant to survive out here, but you've taught me what it means to live. Tears shimmered in her green eyes, catching the golden light of the setting sun through the cabin window. Are you asking what I think you're asking? Sawyer took a deep breath, then dropped to one knee, still holding her hands in his. Stella Ellison, I love you, I love Samuel too. I want us to be a family, a real family. Will you marry me? For a heartbeat that felt like eternity, she simply stared at him. Then, with a soft cry, she pulled him to his feet and threw her arms around his neck. Yes, she whispered against his ear. Oh, Sawyer, yes. He held her tightly, a joy unlike anything he'd ever known spreading through him like wildfire. When he finally pulled back to look at her, the happiness illuminating her face took his breath away. I never thought I'd find love again, she said softly. Especially not here, not after everything that happened, but you. You saw me at my lowest moment and offered hope instead of pity. You've been so good to Samuel, so patient and kind. He's easy to love, Sawyer said truthfully, just like his sister. She laughed, the sound bright with happiness. When should we tell him? Tomorrow. Together. Stella nodded, then her expression grew more serious. There's something you should know, Sawyer, something I haven't told anyone here. A flicker of apprehension went through him. What is it? Samuel, she hesitated, then continued more firmly. Samuel isn't actually my brother, he's my son. Of all the revelations Sawyer might have expected, this wasn't one of them. Your son? She nodded, watching his face carefully. I was very young when I had him, just 16. My parents were devastated by the scandal. The boy, Samuel's father, he left town as soon as he knew I was expecting. My parents told everyone I'd gone to stay with an aunt. When I returned with Samuel, they said he was my orphaned cousin who'd come to live with us. Sawyer listened in silence, his heart aching for the young girl she had been, facing such difficult circumstances alone. When I married Thomas 3 years ago, she continued, he knew the truth. He loved Samuel as his own and agreed to maintain the fiction that Samuel was my brother. It seemed simpler that way, especially when we joined the wagon train. People can be judgmental. Does Samuel know? Sawyer asked gently. Stella shook her head. Not yet. Thomas and I planned to tell him when he was older, when he could understand. After Thomas died, it seemed easier to continue the story. New places, new people who didn't know us. She looked up at him, vulnerability plain in her eyes. Does it change how you feel? Sawyer cupped her face in his hands. Not in the slightest, he said firmly. Except maybe I respect you even more, knowing what you've overcome. Relief washed over her features. I was so afraid to tell you. No more secrets between us, he said, kissing her forehead. And we'll tell Samuel when the time is right, together. She nodded, leaning into his embrace, together. As they stood in the golden light of sunset, holding each other close, Sawyer marveled at the journey that had brought them to this moment. From a widow desperate enough to trade her beautiful hair for bread, to a woman who had helped him rediscover the meaning of home. From a cowboy determined to remain unattached, to a man eager to build a future with a ready-made family. The frontier had not grown any less harsh or unforgiving, but he no longer believed that meant he had to face it alone. The news of their engagement spread quickly through the ranch, met with general approval and a fair amount of good-natured teasing. Samuel, when told of their plans the next day, reacted with unrestrained enthusiasm. Does this mean Sawyer will be my brother now? He asked, bouncing on the cabin's small porch where they had gathered after breakfast. Stella and Sawyer exchanged a look, silently agreeing that the more complicated conversation about Samuel's true parentage would wait for another day. Not exactly, Stella explained gently. Sawyer will be your guardian along with me, like a father. Samuel's eyes widened at this, like Pa Thomas was. Yes, Sawyer said, kneeling to the boy's level, if that's all right with you. I'd be proud to be your pa, Samuel. The boy's face split into a delighted grin. Can I call you Pa Sawyer, and can we live at the ranch forever and ever, and can I have a pony of my very own? Sawyer laughed, ruffling the boy's blonde hair. Yes to all of that, though we'll need to find the right pony. And we'll be living at a special place on the ranch, the old Wilson homestead. It needs some fixing up, but it'll be ours. Our very own place, Samuel breathed, awe in his voice. Our very own place, Stella confirmed, her eyes shining with happiness. In the days that followed, Sawyer divided his time between his regular ranch duties and beginning work on the Wilson cabin. Several of the hands volunteered to help, and even Mr. Porter himself came out to offer advice and occasionally lend a hand with the more challenging repairs. The cabin, which had stood empty for nearly 3 years, needed a new roof, repairs to the stone chimney, and extensive work on the interior. But the location was beautiful, nestled in a small valley with Diamond Creek running along one boundary, pine forests climbing the hills behind, and enough open pasture for a small herd of cattle and a few horses. Stella and Samuel visited often, bringing food for the workers and offering suggestions about the layout and furnishings. Watching Samuel race through the meadow, chasing butterflies or exploring the creek banks, Sawyer could easily imagine the boy growing up in this place, strong and free in the clean mountain air. And in the quiet moments, when he and Stella walked alone through what would be their home, planning their future together, Sawyer felt a contentment he'd never thought possible on the harsh frontier. They set their wedding date for July 5th, the day after the Independence Day celebration in Dovetail Springs. It would be a simple ceremony performed by Reverend Wallace, followed by a small celebration at the ranch. Mr. Porter had insisted on providing a beef for the occasion, and Cookie was already planning an elaborate wedding feast. As June waned and July approached, excitement built throughout the ranch community. The annual Independence Day gathering was always a highlight of the summer, bringing together the scattered ranches and homesteads of the region for a rare day of socializing and celebration. This year, with a wedding to follow, the anticipation was even greater. 3 days before the 4th, Sawyer rode into Dovetail Springs with Harrison and Green to collect mail and supplies. The small town had grown noticeably since spring, with new buildings under construction and more activity in the streets, evidence of the slowly advancing tide of civilization pushing westward. As they tied their horses outside the general store, Sawyer noticed a wagon he didn't recognize parked nearby, a well-made Conestoga with a canvas cover, the type used by families moving west. A man stood beside it, checking the harness of his team. Something about his stance struck Sawyer as vaguely familiar, though he was certain he'd never met the stranger before. Inside Fincher's store, they found Mrs. Fincher supervising the loading of supplies for several customers. She brightened when she saw Sawyer. "Mr. Nightingale, how wonderful to see you. We've heard the happy news about you and Miss Ellison." "Such a lovely match." Sawyer felt his ears warm at the public acknowledgement but nodded politely. "Thank you, ma'am. We're looking forward to the ceremony." "As is everyone, Mrs. Fincher assured him. "Such a romantic story, the way you rescued her and the boy. Why, I was just telling Mr. Ellison how fortunate his sister-in-law was to have met you." Sawyer went still. "Mr. Ellison." "Mrs. Fincher nodded toward the back of the store, where a man stood examining bolts of fabric. "Thomas Ellison's brother, arrived just yesterday, looking for his sister-in-law and nephew. Such a blessing he found them, especially with the wedding coming. Family should be together for such occasions, don't you think?" A cold unease settled in Sawyer's stomach as he studied the man. Tall and well-dressed in an Eastern style, with the same blonde hair as Samuel, though darker. He carried himself with the confidence of education and privilege, a sharp contrast to the rough-hewn men of the frontier. As if sensing Sawyer's scrutiny, the man looked up. His eyes, the same striking green as Stella's, narrowed slightly in assessment before he set down the fabric and approached. "You must be Nightingale," he said, extending a hand. His voice was cultured, his grip firm. "Yates Ellison, I understand you're to marry my late brother's wife." Something in his tone set Sawyer's teeth on edge, though he couldn't have explained why. Sawyer Nightingale, he confirmed, keeping his voice neutral. Stella didn't mention you'd be joining us. She didn't know, Ellison replied smoothly. I've been in Europe on business these past 2 years. Only learned of Thomas's passing when I returned to Boston last month. Naturally, I set out to find Stella and Samuel immediately. Mrs. Fincher beamed at them both. Isn't it wonderful how things work out? Now Miss Ellison will have family to give her away at the wedding. Yates Ellison's smile didn't quite reach his eyes. Indeed, family is everything, wouldn't you agree, Nightingale? Before Sawyer could respond, Harrison called from the front of the store, asking about ammunition. With a nod to Ellison and Mrs. Fincher, Sawyer excused himself, but the sense of unease lingered. Something about Thomas's brother felt off, though Sawyer couldn't put his finger on what exactly troubled him. They completed their business in town quickly, and Sawyer was eager to return to the ranch. As they rode out, he noticed Ellison's wagon was gone from its spot near the general store. That Ellison fellow, he said to Harrison as they rode. Did he strike you as strange? Harrison considered this. Citified for sure, not the type you'd expect to see heading west. Why? No reason, Sawyer replied, though the knot of worry in his chest suggested otherwise. Just wondering. They arrived back at Diamond Creek to find Yates Ellison's wagon already there, positioned near Stella's cabin. The man himself stood on the small porch, deep in conversation with Stella, whose expression was difficult to read from a distance. Samuel sat on the bottom step, looking uncertain. Sawyer dismounted quickly, handing his reins to Harrison. I'll see to this, you go on ahead. As he approached the cabin, he could hear Ellison speaking, his tone persuasive. Only reasonable option, Stella. Boston society would welcome you both. Samuel would have educational opportunities that simply don't exist out here, and the estate is more than comfortable. He broke off as he noticed Sawyer's approach, that same calculating look entering his green eyes. Nightingale back from town already. Stella turned, relief washing over her face at the sight of Sawyer. Sawyer, Yates was just telling me about his proposal. Samuel jumped up from the step and ran to Sawyer, wrapping his arms around the cowboy's waist. Uncle Yates wants us to go to Boston, he said, his voice small and confused. It's very far away. Would you come too? Before Sawyer could answer, Ellison stepped forward. I was explaining to Stella that as Thomas's only brother, I feel a responsibility to his widow and brother. He placed a slight emphasis on the last word that made Sawyer's hackles rise. Boston would offer them a much more civilized life than this primitive existence. Sawyer placed a protective hand on Samuel's shoulder. Stella and Samuel have a home here, he said evenly, and we're to be married in 4 days. Yes, I've heard all about your whirlwind romance, Ellison replied, his smile not reaching his eyes. Very touching. But surely you can see that a woman of Stella's background and a boy of Samuel's potential would be better served in a more established environment. The frontier is no place for proper raising of a child. Sawyer felt his temper rising but kept it firmly in check, aware of Samuel watching him closely. I think that's Stella's decision to make. Of course it is, Ellison agreed smoothly. I'm merely presenting options, family helping family. He turned to Stella. Think about it, dear sister-in-law, no need to rush into anything. I'll be staying in town until after this Independence Day celebration, at least. With a tip of his hat to Stella and a cool nod to Sawyer, he descended the steps and returned to his wagon. They watched in silence as he climbed onto the seat and guided his team back toward Dovetail Springs. As soon as he was out of earshot, Sawyer turned to Stella. Are you all right? She nodded, though her expression was troubled. It was quite a shock. I never expected to see Yates here. Thomas rarely spoke of him, they weren't close. Yet he's suddenly concerned about your welfare. Apparently, Stella shook her head slightly. He says all the right things, but something feels off, and the way he looked at Samuel. She glanced down at the boy, who was still pressed against Sawyer's side. Samuel, why don't you go see if Cookie needs help with dinner preparations? I need to speak with Sawyer privately. The boy nodded and reluctantly released his hold on Sawyer. You won't let him take us away, will you?" he asked, his young face earnest and worried. Sawyer knelt to look him in the eye. "No one's taking you anywhere you don't want to go," he promised. "Now go on and help Cookie. Maybe he'll let you sample whatever pie he's making today." This prospect brightened Samuel's mood considerably, and he ran off toward the cookhouse with the resilience of childhood. Once he was gone, Stella's composure cracked. "Sawyer, he knows." "Knows what?" "About Samuel, that he's my son, not my brother." Her voice trembled slightly. He didn't say it directly, but the way he emphasized certain words. "I'm sure of it." Sawyer guided her to the bench on the porch, sitting beside her. How could he know? "I don't know, perhaps someone from home wrote to him, or maybe Thomas told him before." She pressed her hands to her face briefly. "If he tells people here." "It doesn't matter," Sawyer interrupted gently, taking her hands in his. "You've done nothing wrong, Stella, and even if people knew the truth, it wouldn't change how they feel about you. You're respected here. Loved." She looked up at him, vulnerability clear in her eyes. "Do you really believe that?" "I do," he said firmly. "But more importantly, no matter what Ellison knows or thinks he knows, you don't have to go anywhere with him. Your life is here now, with me and Samuel, if that's still what you want." "It is," she said without hesitation. "More than anything, but Yates." There was something almost threatening in how he spoke about Samuel. As if he had some claim. Sawyer frowned, recalling the calculating look in Ellison's eyes when he'd watched Samuel. Why would he have any interest in the boy? "I don't know," Stella admitted. Thomas never mentioned any special connection between them. In fact, he rarely mentioned Yates at all except to say they'd grown apart after their parents died. "Then perhaps it's just what he claims, a sense of family responsibility," Sawyer suggested, though he didn't entirely believe it himself. Stella didn't appear convinced either. "Perhaps. But I'll feel better when he's gone back east." "He will be," Sawyer assured her. "After the wedding, we'll be at the Wilson place, starting our life together." He squeezed her hands gently. "Try not to worry." She nodded, but the shadow didn't quite leave her eyes. "I'll try." As he left her to check on the Wilson cabin's progress, Sawyer couldn't shake his own sense of disquiet. Yates Ellison's arrival felt like a storm cloud on the horizon, a distant threat that could either dissipate harmlessly or build into something destructive. The timing, so close to their wedding, struck him as more than coincidental. "I'll keep an eye on him," Sawyer promised himself. Stella and Samuel were his future, his family, and he'd protect them whatever it took. The Independence Day celebration dawned clear and bright, with a sky of such perfect blue it seemed painted rather than real. Dovetail Springs had been transformed for the occasion. Bunting in red, white, and blue draped from buildings. A temporary dance platform had been erected in the town square, and long tables groaned under the weight of dishes contributed by every family in the region. Despite the festivities, tension hung over Sawyer as he drove the wagon carrying Stella, Samuel, and several Diamond Creek hands toward town. Yates Ellison hadn't returned to the ranch since his initial visit 3 days earlier, but Sawyer knew he was still in Dovetail, staying at the small hotel that had opened the previous year. What the man's intentions were remained unclear, but Sawyer was determined not to let him disrupt their celebration or their wedding plans. "You look very handsome today," Stella said quietly from her seat beside him, breaking into his thoughts. Sawyer glanced down at himself, somewhat uncomfortable in his town clothes. A clean white shirt, dark vest, and his least-worn denims. He'd even suffered through a proper haircut from Cookie the night before. "Not as fine as you," he replied honestly. Stella wore a new dress of soft blue cotton, purchased with her earnings from the ranch. The color brought out the remarkable clarity of her eyes, and she'd arranged her honey-blonde hair in an elegant style that framed her face beautifully. A small silver locket, a gift from Sawyer that had belonged to his mother, hung at her throat. "Samuel looks quite dapper too," she added with a smile at the boy, who sat on her other side, fidgeting in his Sunday best. "Are there going to be fireworks?" Samuel asked for perhaps the 10th time that morning. "Billy says there are going to be fireworks." "Yes, after dark," Sawyer confirmed patiently. And yes, you can stay up to see them. The boy's face lit up with excitement. And tomorrow is the wedding, and then we move to our new house. That's right, Stella agreed, her smile warming Sawyer's heart. Everything is coming together perfectly. Yet as they entered Dovetail Springs, joining the crowd already gathering for the festivities, Sawyer couldn't quite shake his unease. His eyes scanned the throng, inevitably searching for Yates Ellison's tall figure and Eastern clothes. The morning passed in a pleasant blur of activities: speeches from the mayor and other town dignitaries, patriotic songs led by the schoolteacher, games for the children, and an impressive display of riding skills by some of the younger ranch hands. Samuel participated enthusiastically in the children's sack races and egg and spoon contests, while Stella was drawn into conversation with many of the local women, all eager to discuss tomorrow's wedding. It was during the community picnic, as families spread across the town square to enjoy the feast, that Sawyer finally spotted Yates Ellison. The Easterner stood near the hotel entrance, observing the festivities with an air of detached superiority. When his gaze met Sawyer's across the square, he offered a cool nod before disappearing inside the building. "Everything all right?" Stella asked, noticing Sawyer's distraction. "Fine," he assured her, not wanting to spoil her enjoyment of the day. "Just thought I saw someone I knew." But the brief exchange had renewed his sense that something wasn't right. Ellison's demeanor, the calculated observation, the deliberate withdrawal, struck him as the behavior of a man with plans he didn't wish to reveal prematurely. As the afternoon progressed into evening, the celebration shifted toward dancing and socializing. Lanterns were lit around the square as the sun began its descent, casting a golden glow over the gathering. Musicians took their places on a small platform, tuning their instruments for the dancing to come. Sawyer, who had never been much of a dancer, nonetheless found himself leading Stella onto the wooden dance floor for a lively reel. Her laughter as they moved through the steps, sometimes clumsily on his part, was worth every moment of self-consciousness. "You're better at this than you claimed," she teased as the music ended. "Don't tell the other hands," he replied with a grin. "I have a reputation to maintain." They were making their way back toward where Samuel played with other children when Reverend Wallace approached, his usually cheerful face serious. "Miss Ellison," he said with a slight bow, "Mr. Nightingale, might I have a word in private?" Something in his tone sent a chill down Sawyer's spine. He exchanged a glance with Stella, whose expression reflected his own concern. "Of course, Reverend," she said. "Samuel is fine where he is for a few minutes." The minister led them away from the crowd, toward the small church at the edge of the square. "I've just had a most disturbing conversation with Mr. Yates Ellison," he said once they were out of earshot of the revelers. Stella's hand found Sawyer's, her grip tight with apprehension. "What did he say?" "He has raised concerns about your upcoming marriage," the Reverend said carefully. "Specifically, he claims that there may be impediments that would make the union inappropriate." "What impediments?" Sawyer demanded, his patience wearing thin. Reverend Wallace looked uncomfortable. He was not entirely specific. But he suggested that Miss Ellison's relationship with young Samuel is not what it appears to be, and that this misrepresentation might bear on her fitness to enter into marriage. Stella paled visibly, her free hand going to her throat. "He had no right. He claims to be acting out of concern for his late brother's family," the Reverend continued gently. "And as a man of God, I cannot simply dismiss allegations that might affect the sanctity of a marriage I am to perform." Sawyer fought to keep his temper in check. "Reverend, with all due respect, whatever Ellison may have implied, there is nothing that affects Stella's and my commitment to each other or our fitness to marry." "I would like to believe that," the minister said, "but Mr. Ellison was most insistent that I should at least delay the ceremony until certain facts could be established." "What facts?" Stella asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The Reverend hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. "He suggested that Samuel's parentage might be in question, and that his brother's, Thomas's, marriage to you might have been entered into under false pretenses." Stella's composure finally broke. How dare he? Thomas knew everything about my past. He loved Samuel as his own. Our marriage was built on truth and mutual respect. I believe you, Reverend Wallace said gently. But as the person responsible for performing marriages in this community, I must be certain there are no impediments. Perhaps if we could discuss the matter more fully, privately. There's nothing to discuss, Sawyer interrupted, his protective instincts flaring. Whatever Ellison's game is, he has no right to interfere in our lives or to question Stella's character. Mr. Nightingale, I understand your frustration, but— No, Reverend, Stella said suddenly, her voice steadier now. Sawyer is right. There is no impediment to our marriage, but there is something you should know, something I should have been honest about from the beginning. She took a deep breath, squaring her shoulders with the quiet dignity Sawyer had admired from the first day they met. Samuel is not my brother, he is my son. I had him when I was 16, unmarried. My parents, to avoid scandal, presented him as a distant relative we had taken in. When I married Thomas, he knew the truth and accepted Samuel as his own. We maintained the fiction that Samuel was my brother because it seemed simpler, especially when joining the wagon train west. The Reverend's expression softened with understanding. I see, and Mr. Ellison knows this. Apparently so, though how he discovered it, I'm not certain. Thomas and his brother were not close. Stella's voice trembled slightly. I never intended to deceive anyone here. It just seemed easier to continue the story we'd been telling. My dear, Reverend Wallace said gently, you are hardly the first young woman to face such circumstances. The Lord teaches us forgiveness and compassion, not judgment. He glanced at Sawyer. And you were aware of this. Yes, Sawyer confirmed without hesitation. It changes nothing about how I feel about Stella or Samuel. They're my family now, or will be after tomorrow. The minister nodded slowly. Then I see no impediment to the marriage. Whatever Mr. Ellison's concerns, they appear to be unfounded or at least overstated. He patted Stella's hand reassuringly. The ceremony will proceed as planned, my dear. Though perhaps it might be wise to speak with Samuel about his true parentage before too much time passes. Children are remarkably resilient when truth is presented with love. Relief washed over Stella's face. Thank you, Reverend. We've already discussed telling him soon, once we're settled in our new home. A wise decision, the minister agreed. Now shall we return to the celebration? I believe they're about to begin the waltz, and a bride-to-be should certainly have a dance with her intended. As they made their way back toward the square, Sawyer kept a protective arm around Stella's waist. Are you all right? He asked quietly. She nodded, though her face was still pale beneath its light tan. I never thought I'd have to face that past again, not here. You handled it with grace, as you do everything, Sawyer told her. And the Reverend is right, it changes nothing about tomorrow. Stella managed a small smile, but as they rejoined the festivities, her eyes scanned the crowd with newfound wariness. Where is Yates now, I wonder? And what is he really after? Sawyer had been wondering the same thing. Ellison's attempt to disrupt their wedding through the Reverend suggested a motive beyond mere family concern. But what? Try not to worry about him tonight, he advised, though his own senses remained on alert. Tomorrow we'll be married, and the day after that we'll be at our own place. Whatever game he's playing, he can't touch us there. Stella nodded, visibly making an effort to set aside her concerns. You're right, I won't let him spoil our celebration. They rejoined Samuel, who was watching the dancers with wide-eyed fascination. The boy brightened at their return. Can we dance too? Billy's ma and pa are dancing. Of course we can, Stella laughed, her spirits lifting at her son's enthusiasm. Though I'm afraid Sawyer and I are not the most graceful partners. I don't mind, Samuel declared, grabbing both their hands and pulling them toward the dance floor. For the next hour they lost themselves in the simple joy of the celebration, dancing, laughing, sharing slices of pie and cups of lemonade. Samuel's boundless energy and excitement proved contagious, and even Sawyer found himself relaxing as the evening deepened toward night. The fireworks, when they finally began, drew gasps of wonder from the crowd. Brilliant bursts of red, white, and blue illuminated the night sky, their thunderous reports echoing off the distant mountains. Samuel, perched on Sawyer's shoulders for a better view, squealed with delight at each colorful explosion. "It's magic," he declared, his small hands gripping Sawyer's hair for balance. "Close enough," Sawyer agreed, one hand steadying the boy while the other found Stella's in the darkness. As the final rockets ascended, painting the sky with a spectacular finale of light and sound, Sawyer felt a sense of rightness that transcended his earlier concerns. This was what mattered, Stella warm beside him, Samuel's innocent wonder, the promise of tomorrow's beginning. Whatever shadows Yates Ellison might cast, they couldn't dim the light of what they were building together. The crowd began to disperse as the last echoes faded, families gathering sleepy children and loading wagons for the journey home. Samuel, despite his earlier excitement, was now yawning widely in Stella's arms. "I think someone's ready for bed," she observed with a fond smile. "Big day tomorrow, after all." "I'm not tired," Samuel protested, the effect somewhat undermined by another enormous yawn. "Can't we stay longer?" "The celebration's over, partner," Sawyer told him. "Time to head back to the ranch so you can rest up for the wedding." They made their way through the thinning crowd toward where their wagon waited. Several Diamond Creek hands had already climbed aboard, their good-natured banter suggesting they'd enjoyed the celebration's liquid refreshments. Sawyer was helping Stella settle Samuel in the wagon when a voice spoke from behind them. "A lovely evening, wasn't it? So quintessentially frontier." They turned to find Yates Ellison standing nearby, impeccably dressed despite the dust and informality of the celebration. His expression was pleasant, but his eyes remained cold. "Mr. Ellison," Stella acknowledged stiffly, "I understand you've been speaking to Reverend Wallace about concerns regarding our wedding." "Merely ensuring everything is proper," Ellison replied smoothly. "Family looking out for family, you understand." "I'm not sure I do," Stella countered. "Thomas rarely mentioned you, and you've shown no interest in our welfare until now. Why the sudden concern?" Ellison's smile tightened slightly. "Perhaps I regret the distance that grew between my brother and myself. Perhaps I feel a responsibility to ensure his legacy is properly honored." Something in the way he said legacy sent a chill down Sawyer's spine. Before he could respond, however, Samuel's sleepy voice came from the wagon. "Uncle Yates, are you coming to the wedding tomorrow?" Ellison's gaze shifted to the boy, and for a brief moment, something almost predatory flashed in his eyes. "I wouldn't miss it, Samuel. After all, we're family." The emphasis he placed on the last word wasn't lost on either Sawyer or Stella. She moved protectively closer to the wagon where her son sat. "It's late," Sawyer said firmly. "We should be heading back to the ranch." "Of course," Ellison agreed with a slight bow. "I'll see you all tomorrow at the church. Sleep well." As he walked away, melting into the shadows beyond the lantern light, Stella shivered despite the warm summer night. "I don't trust him, Sawyer. There's something he's not saying." "I know," Sawyer agreed grimly. "But after tomorrow we'll be married, legally bound. Whatever he's planning, he'll have less leverage then." "I hope you're right," Stella whispered, her eyes following Ellison's retreating figure. "For all our sakes." The ride back to Diamond Creek was subdued compared to the festive journey into town. Samuel fell asleep almost immediately, his head pillowed against Stella's side. The other hands, sensing the tension between Sawyer and Stella, kept their conversation quiet and focused on the celebration's highlights rather than the upcoming wedding. As they approached the ranch, the full moon illuminated the peaceful landscape, the main house dark except for a single lamp in the window, the bunkhouse and other buildings silvered in moonlight. It should have been a comforting sight, a homecoming. Instead, Sawyer found himself scanning the shadows, half expecting to see Ellison's wagon or some other sign of trouble. After helping Stella carry the sleeping Samuel to the cabin, Sawyer lingered on the porch, reluctant to leave her alone despite the late hour. "I could stay," he offered quietly. "Sleep out here on the porch, just to be safe." Stella shook her head, though her eyes were troubled. "No need for that. We're on Diamond Creek land, surrounded by friends." And Yates is back in town. She attempted a smile. Besides, it's bad luck to see the bride before the wedding. Sawyer wasn't particularly superstitious, but he recognized her attempt to maintain normalcy despite her concerns. All right. But I'll be in the bunkhouse if you need anything. And Copper's in the corral, one shout and I can be here in minutes. My protector, she said softly, reaching up to touch his cheek. Thank you for understanding about Samuel. For accepting both of us, complicated past and all. There's nothing to accept, Sawyer told her honestly. You and Samuel are the best things that have ever happened to me. Tomorrow can't come soon enough. She rose on tiptoe to kiss him, a gentle promise of tomorrow's commitment. Good night, Sawyer Nightingale. The next time we part, it will be as husband and wife. With those words to warm him, Sawyer made his way to the bunkhouse. Despite his lingering concerns about Ellison, exhaustion claimed him quickly, and he fell into a deep sleep filled with dreams of the life they would build together. He awoke to shouting. Disoriented, Sawyer sat up in his bunk, blinking in the gray pre-dawn light filtering through the bunkhouse windows. For a moment, he thought the commotion might be part of his dream. Then he heard it again, voices raised in alarm and the thunder of hooves in the ranch yard. He was on his feet instantly, pulling on his boots and grabbing his shirt. Around him, the other hands were stirring, mumbling questions as they too were roused by the disturbance. Sawyer burst out of the bunkhouse into the cool morning air. The eastern sky was just beginning to lighten, the mountains silhouetted against a palette of deepening blue. Several figures moved urgently around the main house, and Mr. Porter stood on the porch, issuing directions to the ranch hands who had gathered. "What's happening?" Sawyer demanded, hurrying toward them. Porter turned, his weathered face grave. "Nightingale, you're needed." "It's Stella Ellison." A cold fist of dread closed around Sawyer's heart. "What about her? Is she hurt?" "She's gone," Porter said flatly. "Her and the boy both. Cabin's empty, bed's not slept in from the looks of it. And that brother-in-law of hers cleared out of the hotel in town sometime after midnight, according to the telegram that just came." For a moment, Sawyer couldn't process what he was hearing. Gone, but he'd left her at the cabin just hours ago. They were to be married today. There must be some mistake, he said, his voice sounding distant to his own ears. Maybe they went for an early walk. Tracks leading away from the cabin, Billy Watson interrupted, approaching from the direction of Stella's small home. 2 horses plus what looks like a wagon. Headed east, not toward town. Ellison, Sawyer growled, understanding dawning with sickening clarity. He's taken them. We don't know that for certain, Porter cautioned. Could be she went willingly. Sawyer shook his head vehemently. No. She wouldn't, not without telling me, not the day of our wedding. He ran a hand through his hair, mind racing. How long ago? Billy considered, dues settled on the tracks. I'd say at least 4, maybe 5 hours. He's got a solid head start then, Sawyer realized, already turning toward the corral where Copper stood. I'm going after them. Porter nodded, having apparently expected this. Take Watson and Harrison with you. I've already had them saddle up, and supplies for 3 days. He handed Sawyer a folded paper. This came with the telegram about Ellison leaving the hotel. Addressed to you. Sawyer unfolded the note with dread, recognizing Stella's handwriting immediately. Sawyer. Forgive me, Yates knows the truth about Samuel's father, knows things I never told anyone, not even Thomas. He threatens to expose everything if I don't return east with him, says he has proof that would ruin us all. I cannot risk what such revelations would do to Samuel or to you. Better we leave now cleanly than destroy the reputation you've built here. Know that I love you, I will always love you, but some secrets are too dangerous to share, even with those we hold most dear. Please don't follow us. It would only bring more pain, Stella. Sawyer read the note twice, his hands shaking with a mixture of disbelief and rage. What truth about Samuel's father could be so damning that Stella would abandon their life together? What hold did Ellison have over her that would make her flee in the night, rather than face it together? None of it made sense. The Stella he knew, brave, forthright, determined, would not surrender to threats or blackmail, not unless. not unless she believed she was protecting something more important than her own happiness. Someone more important, Samuel. She didn't go willingly, Sawyer said, folding the note and tucking it inside his shirt. She's being coerced, and I'm getting them back. Porter studied him for a long moment, then nodded. Supplies are packed. Take what weapons you need from the gun cabinet, and Nightingale, he hesitated, then continued gruffly, bring them home safe. Within 20 minutes, Sawyer, Harrison, and young Billy Watson were mounted and ready to ride. The eastern sky had lightened to a pale rose, promising another beautiful summer day, a cruel contrast to the storm raging in Sawyer's heart. The wedding that should have taken place in just a few hours now seemed like a distant dream, replaced by the nightmare reality of Stella and Samuel in the hands of a man whose true motives remained obscure but undoubtedly dangerous. As they set out, following the clear trail leading east from the cabin, Sawyer's mind churned with questions. What secret could be so damning that Stella would abandon everything they'd built? What connection did Ellison truly have to Samuel? And most pressingly, how far would the man go to get what he wanted? The answers, Sawyer feared, lay somewhere ahead on the trail, answers that might destroy the future he'd only just allowed himself to imagine. They rode hard through the morning, following the wagon tracks that led away from Diamond Creek toward the more settled territories to the east. The trail wasn't difficult to read. 3 horses and a wagon left clear marks in the soft earth, especially with the recent rains. One horse appeared to be carrying 2 riders, likely Stella and Samuel together. They're pushing hard, Harrison observed as they paused briefly to water the horses at a small stream around midday. Wagons not exactly built for speed, but they're making good time. Sawyer nodded grimly, studying the tracks on the far bank. They know we'll be following. Ellison will want to reach more populated areas where they can blend in or access stage routes east. What's his game, do you think? Billy asked, adjusting his saddle while his mount drank deeply. Why take them? If it's money he's after, doesn't seem like Miss Ellison would have much. I don't know, Sawyer admitted, though possibilities had been churning through his mind throughout the morning's ride. But it has something to do with Samuel. The way Ellison looked at the boy, the things he implied to Reverend Wallace. He didn't complete the thought, unwilling to voice his darkest fears. Instead, he remounted Copper, signaling the end of their brief rest. Let's keep moving. I want to close the gap before nightfall. As the afternoon wore on, the landscape gradually changed. The high mountain meadows and pine forests of Diamond Creek country gave way to lower, more rolling terrain. They were moving into the foothills now, where settlements became more frequent and the isolation of the high country began to recede. The trail led them to a small settlement called Mineral Springs, little more than a trading post, a rough saloon, and a handful of cabins clustered around a natural hot spring that gave the place its name. Here they found their first solid confirmation that they were on the right track. The trader, a grizzled man named Whitley, nodded when shown the simple description Sawyer provided. Passed through early this morning. City feller with a blonde woman and boy. Bought supplies, food, water, blankets, seemed in a hurry. How did they seem? Sawyer pressed. The woman and boy, were they all right? Whitley scratched his beard thoughtfully. Woman looked tired. Wasn't smiling. Boy seemed confused, kept asking questions the man didn't much like answering. Which way did they head? East still, toward Junction City. It's the nearest place with a stagecoach stop. Junction City was a full day's ride under normal circumstances. Perhaps less for 3 men pushing hard, but longer for a wagon carrying a woman and child. If Ellison was aiming to catch a stage east, they might still have time to intercept them. Thanks, Sawyer said, tossing the man a coin for his trouble. If they come back this way, or if anyone asks after them, we're family. Looking to bring them home. Whitley nodded, pocketing the coin. Good luck to you. Woman didn't look too happy in that company, if you don't mind my saying. That simple observation both confirmed Sawyer's worst fears and strengthened his resolve. Stella wasn't with Ellison willingly, regardless of what her letter had claimed. She was protecting Samuel, and perhaps Sawyer himself, from whatever threat Ellison held over her. They rode on, pushing their mounts as hard as they dared in the growing heat of the afternoon. The trail remained clear, though in places it joined larger roads where other travelers had passed, making tracking more challenging. "We're gaining on them," Harrison observed as they paused at a creek crossing to rest the horses briefly. "Tracks are fresher. They can't be more than a few hours ahead now." Sawyer nodded, his jaw set with determination. "We'll keep going as long as there's light. If we push, we might catch them before they reach Junction City." But as the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, turning the sky to gold and crimson, they encountered an unexpected obstacle. The trail they'd been following led into a narrow valley between two rocky ridges, a natural choke point that locals called Serpent Pass due to its winding nature. As they approached, Sawyer raised a hand, signaling the others to halt. "Something's not right," he said quietly, studying the terrain ahead. The pass was less than 100 yards wide at its narrowest point, with steep, boulder-strewn slopes rising on either side, a perfect place for an ambush. Harrison nodded, his experienced eyes scanning the ridgelines. Too quiet, no birds. Sawyer dismounted, handing Copper's reins to Billy. "Stay here with the horses. Harrison, with me. We'll scout ahead on foot." Moving cautiously, using the scattered pine trees and boulders for cover, Sawyer and Harrison advanced toward the pass entrance. They had covered perhaps half the distance when Harrison suddenly grabbed Sawyer's arm, pointing to a glint of metal among the rocks on the southern ridge. "Rifle barrel," he whispered. "Someone's up there." As if on cue, a shot rang out, the bullet striking the ground just feet from where they stood. They dove for cover behind a large boulder as a voice called down from the ridge. "That's far enough, Nightingale. Next one won't miss." Ellison, Sawyer would recognize that cultured Eastern accent anywhere, but how had he managed to get ahead of them? And where were Stella and Samuel? "Where are they, Ellison?" Sawyer shouted back, pressing his back against the boulder. "What have you done with Stella and the boy?" A laugh floated down from the ridge. "They're safe enough for now." "Which is more than I can say for you if you keep following us." "What do you want with them?" Sawyer demanded. "Whatever it is, whatever you're holding over Stella, we can work it out." "Just let them go." "I'm afraid it's not that simple," Ellison replied, his voice maddeningly calm. "You see, Samuel isn't just any boy. He's an Ellison by blood, and as such he has certain inheritance rights that my brother Thomas was too sentimental to properly secure." "Inheritance rights?" Sawyer exchanged a confused glance with Harrison. "What are you talking about?" "My father's will was quite specific," Ellison continued. "The Ellison shipping fortune passes to the eldest male heir of each generation. With Thomas dead and no legitimate children of my own, Samuel is next in line, assuming his parentage can be properly established." Suddenly, several pieces fell into place in Sawyer's mind. "You're Samuel's father," he realized with dawning horror. "That's what Stella was hiding. That's the secret she couldn't tell me." A brief silence followed his declaration. Then Ellison's voice came again, tinged with something like respect. "Very good, Nightingale. Yes, Samuel is my son. A youthful indiscretion during a business trip to Illinois. I never knew about the boy until Thomas wrote me shortly before his death, though I suspect he meant it more as a reproach than an introduction. My sentimental brother always did have a misplaced sense of honor." "So this is about money," Harrison growled beside Sawyer, "taking the boy to claim an inheritance." "Crude but essentially correct," Ellison confirmed. "The Ellison fortune is substantial: ships, warehouses, investments spanning 2 continents. Why should it go to distant cousins when there's a direct bloodline heir available? Samuel will want for nothing in Boston. The finest education, the best social connections. A future far beyond anything your primitive frontier could offer him." "And Stella," Sawyer challenged, his hands clenching into fists at the casual way Ellison discussed uprooting Samuel's life. "What happens to her in this plan of yours?" "That depends entirely on her cooperation," Ellison replied coolly. "If she accepts the situation gracefully, she'll be well provided for, a comfortable house and appropriate allowance. She can even continue as Samuel's mother, with certain adjustments to the narrative of his birth." The calculated cruelty of it all made Sawyer's blood boil. To use a mother's love for her child as leverage, to threaten exposure and scandal if she didn't comply with his schemes, it was unconscionable. "She'll never agree to that," Sawyer said with absolute certainty. "Not for long. Stella isn't someone you can control or threaten indefinitely." "Perhaps not," Ellison acknowledged, "but for now she's being quite reasonable. Amazing what a mother will do to protect her child from painful truths." Another shot rang out, this one splintering bark from a tree just behind their boulder. "Now, this conversation has been enlightening, but I'm afraid it must conclude. I've left a man to delay you while we continue east. I advise you to turn back, Nightingale. There's nothing for you in this fight, no legal claim to either Stella or the boy." "You're wrong," Sawyer called back, even as he calculated angles and possibilities for getting out of their exposed position. "Stella chose me. She chose the life we're building together. That means something, Ellison, even if you can't understand it." "How touchingly romantic," Ellison replied, sarcasm evident even at a distance, "but ultimately irrelevant. Goodbye, Nightingale. If you're wise, you won't follow us any further." Sawyer could hear movement on the ridge, suggesting Ellison was withdrawing. But the occasional glint of metal among the rocks confirmed his claim about leaving someone behind to delay their pursuit. "What now?" Harrison whispered, pressed close to the boulder beside Sawyer. "Can't go forward with a shooter on the ridge, and can't go back without the woman and boy." Sawyer studied their surroundings, mind racing. The sun was setting rapidly now, shadows lengthening across the valley floor. Soon it would be dark, a disadvantage for whoever was watching the pass, but also for them if they tried to navigate unfamiliar terrain at night. "We wait," he decided finally. "Whoever's up there will have to move eventually or make a mistake, and when he does—" He patted the revolver at his hip meaningfully. Harrison nodded, settling in beside him as the first stars began to appear in the darkening eastern sky. Behind them they could hear Billy Watson approaching cautiously with the horses, keeping to what cover was available. As full darkness descended, Sawyer's thoughts turned to Stella and Samuel, somewhere ahead on the trail to Junction City. Were they safe? Was Stella managing to keep Samuel's spirits up despite the confusion and fear he must be feeling? And what would happen when they reached the stagecoach stop? Once they boarded an eastbound stage, tracking them would become vastly more difficult. The hours crept by, marked only by the slow wheel of stars overhead and the occasional call of a night bird. Whoever watched the pass remained vigilant, occasionally shifting position as revealed by the soft scrape of boot on stone. Sawyer and Harrison took turns resting, though Sawyer found sleep impossible with his mind churning over what Ellison had revealed and what might lie ahead. It was in the darkest hour before dawn that their opportunity finally came. A small fire flared briefly on the ridge as their watcher lit a cigarette, momentarily illuminating his position among the boulders. Harrison, on watch at that moment, nudged Sawyer and pointed silently. Now they knew exactly where he was. Moving with exaggerated caution, Sawyer circled wide around the base of the ridge, using the darkness and scattered vegetation for cover. The climb was treacherous in the dark. Loose rocks threatened to give away his position with every step, and the slope was steep enough in places to require both hands for balance. But years of working cattle in rugged country had made Sawyer sure-footed, and the stakes were too high for caution alone. He reached a position about 30 yards below and to the left of where they'd spotted the watcher. From here he could make out a darker silhouette against the star-strewn sky, a man seated on a boulder, rifle across his knees, occasionally scanning the valley below. Sawyer drew his revolver and continued his careful approach. 20 yards. 15, 10. He was close enough now to hear the man's breathing, to smell the tobacco from his earlier cigarette. A loose stone shifted under Sawyer's boot, clattering down the slope. The watcher spun, rifle coming up, peering into the darkness. "Who's there?" Sawyer lunged forward, covering the remaining distance in a rush. The rifle discharged with a deafening report, the bullet whining harmlessly into the night sky as Sawyer crashed into the man, bearing him backward onto the rocky ground. They grappled in the darkness, each fighting for control. The watcher was strong and clearly experienced in rough fighting, landing several solid blows to Sawyer's ribs and face. But Sawyer had the advantage of surprise and the burning determination that came from knowing Stella and Samuel's future hung in the balance. With a final, desperate effort, Sawyer pinned the man beneath him, pressing the barrel of his revolver against the watcher's throat. "Enough," he growled. "Where are they heading? Tell me Ellison's plan." The man ceased struggling, his breath coming in harsh pants. "Junction City," he gasped. "Stage leaves at noon. Heading to Denver, then east by train." "How many men with Ellison?" "Just him now, had 3 of us, but he sent the others ahead to secure passage." Sawyer pressed the revolver harder against the man's throat. "If you're lying to me." "I ain't," the man protested. "I'm just hired help. Ellison found us in Denver last month, said he needed men for a family matter, paid good money up front." It fit with what they knew, Ellison arriving from Europe, learning of Thomas's death, then methodically planning to secure Samuel for the inheritance. This hadn't been an impulsive action but a calculated scheme. "What's he planning for the woman?" Sawyer demanded. "Stella, what happens to her once they reach Boston?" The man hesitated, then answered with reluctant honesty. "Don't know for certain. Ellison doesn't share all his plans. But heard him say something about an asylum once. Said some women need proper care when they become difficult." Cold fury washed through Sawyer at the implication. Ellison intended to institutionalize Stella once Samuel was secured, to remove her as an obstacle to his control of the boy and the inheritance. The man's casual cruelty seemed to know no bounds. "You're going to stay right here," Sawyer told the hired gun, his voice deadly calm. "My friends down below will keep an eye on you. If you try to follow us or warn Ellison, they won't be as merciful as I'm being. Understand?" The man nodded quickly, evidently recognizing the dangerous edge in Sawyer's voice. With efficient movements, Sawyer used the man's own belt to secure his hands, then tore a strip from his bandana to serve as a gag. Checking once more that the bindings were secure, he began making his way back down the ridge to where Harrison and Billy waited. "Got him," Sawyer reported as he reached them. "Junction City is the target. Stage leaves at noon." Harrison glanced at the lightening eastern sky. "That's less than 6 hours. It's at least a 4-hour ride, and that's pushing hard." "Then we push harder," Sawyer said simply, moving toward where Copper waited. "We've got one chance to stop them before they board that stage." "I don't intend to waste it." As the first golden rays of dawn broke over the eastern horizon, the 3 men rode out of Serpent Pass at a gallop, leaving their prisoner securely bound on the ridge. The trail ahead was clearer now, following an established road toward Junction City. With no need to track and no further ambushes to worry about, they could focus solely on speed. Sawyer rode with single-minded determination, his thoughts fixed on what awaited at Junction City. Ellison would be expecting pursuit but might not anticipate how quickly they'd overcome his delaying tactic. The element of surprise could work in their favor, but only if they reached the stagecoach stop in time. Junction City appeared on the horizon shortly before 11, a larger settlement than Mineral Springs, with proper streets, a small hotel, several stores, and the stagecoach station that gave the town its importance. As they approached, Sawyer scanned the busy main street, searching for any sign of Stella's honey-blonde hair or Samuel's smaller figure. "There," Harrison said suddenly, pointing toward the stagecoach office. "That's Ellison's wagon." The vehicle stood empty outside the station, its team unhitched and presumably stabled nearby. There was no sign of Ellison, Stella, or Samuel. "They must be inside," Sawyer reasoned, dismounting and securing Copper to a hitching post. "Harrison, circle around to the back of the station. Billy, watch the street. I'm going in the front." The stagecoach office was crowded with travelers awaiting the midday departure. Sawyer pushed through the press of bodies, eyes searching for Stella's distinctive hair or Ellison's tall figure. He spotted them near the ticket counter, Ellison standing imperiously before the clerk, Stella seated on a bench nearby with Samuel close beside her. The boy looked tired and confused, while Stella's face was a mask of controlled tension. Sawyer paused, considering his approach. A direct confrontation in the crowded office could endanger innocent bystanders, particularly if Ellison was armed. But allowing them to board the stage wasn't an option either. Before he could decide, Samuel glanced up and saw him. The boy's face transformed with joy. "Sawyer!" he cried, leaping from the bench and running toward him. Stella's head snapped up at her son's exclamation, her eyes widening with a mixture of hope and fear as she spotted Sawyer. "Samuel, wait!" she called, but the boy had already thrown himself into Sawyer's arms. "You came!" Samuel exclaimed. "Uncle Yates said you wouldn't, but I knew you would." "Of course I came," Sawyer said, holding the boy tightly while keeping his eyes on Ellison, who had turned at the commotion. "I'll always come for you and your ma." Ellison's face darkened with fury. "This is a private family matter, Nightingale," he said, his cultured voice carrying easily across the crowded room. "I suggest you leave before things become unpleasant." Sawyer set Samuel down but kept a protective hand on the boy's shoulder. "It stopped being private when you forced them to leave in the middle of the night. When you threatened Stella." By now the other travelers had fallen silent, watching the confrontation with the avid interest of those suddenly presented with unexpected entertainment. Stella had risen from the bench and moved closer, her eyes fixed on Sawyer with a desperate intensity. "Sawyer," she said quietly, "you shouldn't have come, you don't understand." "I understand perfectly," he interrupted gently. "Ellison is Samuel's father. He wants the boy for an inheritance, and he's threatened to put you in an asylum once he has Samuel secured in Boston." Shock registered on Stella's face at this last revelation, her gaze darting to Ellison with new horror. "Is that true?" she demanded. "An asylum?" Ellison's expression hardened. "Only if necessary. I had hoped for your cooperation, Stella." "By threatening to expose Samuel's parentage." "By using my son as leverage," anger replaced the fear in her eyes. "You have no right." "I have every right," Ellison cut in coldly. "He is my son, regardless of the circumstances of his conception. And an Ellison belongs with Ellisons, not in some crude frontier outpost with a common cowhand." Sawyer stepped forward, placing himself protectively between Stella and Ellison. "Samuel belongs with his mother. And Stella belongs wherever she chooses to be." "How touching," Ellison sneered, "but ultimately irrelevant. I have legal documentation establishing my paternity and my right to provide for the boy's proper upbringing. No frontier court would rule against the resources I can bring to bear." "Perhaps not," came a new voice from the office doorway. "But I suspect they might be interested in these." All heads turned to see Harrison entering, a leather portfolio in his hands. Behind him stood the local sheriff, a stocky man with a graying mustache and sharp eyes that missed nothing of the scene before him. "Found these in Ellison's wagon," Harrison explained, handing the portfolio to Sawyer. "Thought they might be important." Sawyer opened the portfolio to find a stack of legal documents, correspondence, and what appeared to be financial records. Scanning them quickly, he felt a cold certainty settle over him. "These aren't just inheritance papers," he said, looking up at Ellison with undisguised contempt. "These are records of embezzlement. You've been stealing from the Ellison Company for years. That's why you need Samuel, to secure your control before the other shareholders discover what you've done." Ellison's face drained of color. "Those are private business matters." "You have no right." "Sheriff," Sawyer interrupted, turning to the lawman who had entered behind Harrison. "I believe these documents would interest the authorities in Boston, and I suspect Mr. Ellison here might be wanted for questioning about his business practices." The sheriff stepped forward, taking the portfolio from Sawyer and examining its contents with professional interest. "Looks like fraud to me," he observed after a moment, "and kidnapping to boot from what I've heard." He fixed Ellison with a hard stare. "I think you'd better come with me, sir. We'll send a telegram to Boston and see what they have to say about these papers." For a moment Ellison looked as if he might resist. His hand twitched toward his coat, where Sawyer suspected he carried a concealed weapon. but a glance around the crowded office with all eyes upon him seemed to deflate his resolve. "This isn't over," he said quietly, his gaze moving from Sawyer to Stella. "The boy is still in Ellison." "That fact won't change." "Maybe not," Stella replied, her voice steady despite the emotion visible in her eyes. "But he's my son first, and nothing will ever change that either." As the sheriff led Ellison away, the tension in the room gradually dissipated. The other travelers returned to their conversations, though with frequent glances toward Stella, Samuel, and Sawyer, clearly storing up the drama to recount later. Samuel, who had watched the confrontation with wide eyes, tugged at Sawyer's sleeve. "Is it true? Is Uncle Yates really my father?" The direct question, asked with a child's innocent bluntness, created a moment of frozen silence between the adults. Stella knelt to her son's level, taking his small hands in hers. "Yes, Samuel," she said gently, "but it's complicated. We'll explain everything when we get home. The important thing is that nothing changes how much I love you, how much we all love you." The boy considered this, his young brow furrowed in thought. "Is Sawyer still going to be my pa? You're still getting married, right?" Stella looked up at Sawyer, uncertainty in her eyes. I don't know, after everything that's happened." Sawyer knelt beside them, his heart full to bursting with love for this brave woman and the remarkable child she had raised. "If you'll still have me," he said simply. "Nothing's changed for me, Stella. I love you both. I want us to be a family." Tears welled in her eyes, even knowing everything. "The lies, the secrets." "You didn't lie," Sawyer corrected her gently. "You protected your son the best way you knew how, and the only secret that matters is that you love him enough to sacrifice everything for him. That's not something to be ashamed of, it's something to honor." A tear spilled down her cheek as she searched his face. "I was so afraid you'd hate me when you learned the truth." "Never," Sawyer promised, reaching out to brush the tear away. "You and Samuel are my heart now, my home." "Nothing can change that." Samuel, watching this exchange with the solemn attention of a child trying to understand adult matters, suddenly broke into a wide smile. "Does this mean we can go back to the ranch and live in our new house? And I can still have a pony?" The simple questions, so characteristic of a 10-year-old's priorities, broke the tension. Stella laughed through her tears, and Sawyer found himself joining in, the release of accumulated fear and worry making the moment all the sweeter. "Yes to all of that," he assured Samuel, ruffling the boy's blonde hair, "though we might be a day late for the wedding." "We can have another wedding," Samuel declared with the confidence of youth, "an even better one." "With cake." Stella rose, wiping away the last of her tears. "I think that sounds perfect," she said, her eyes never leaving Sawyer's face, "if Reverend Wallace is still willing." "He will be," Sawyer assured her, standing and drawing her into his arms at last. "And if not, we'll find someone else. The important thing is that we're together, that's all that matters." As they exited the stagecoach office into the bright midday sunshine, Samuel running ahead to where Billy waited with the horses, Sawyer kept his arm firmly around Stella's waist. The future that had seemed lost just hours ago now stretched before them again, different perhaps, with new challenges to face and truths to navigate, but theirs to shape together. "I'm sorry," Stella said quietly as they walked, "for leaving without telling you the truth. I thought I was protecting you both." "You have nothing to apologize for," Sawyer told her firmly. "You did what you thought was right, and now we move forward together. No more secrets, no more fear." She leaned into his embrace, her honey-blonde hair gleaming in the summer sun. "Together," she agreed softly, "no more fear." The journey back to Diamond Creek took longer than their pursuit had, with Stella and Samuel riding in Ellison's wagon, while Sawyer, Harrison, and Billy rode alongside. They traveled at a more moderate pace, stopping early to make camp and allowing Samuel to explore streams and meadows along the way, small adventures that helped restore the boy's spirits after the confusion and fear of the preceding days. In the quiet of evening, as Samuel slept exhausted in the wagon, Sawyer and Stella sat by the campfire and talked, truly talked, about everything that had happened and all that lay ahead. She told him the full story of her relationship with Yates Ellison, a brief courtship when she was barely 16, his promises and subsequent abandonment when she revealed her pregnancy, her parents' decision to present Samuel as a distant relative to avoid scandal. Thomas knew everything from the beginning, she explained, her face illuminated by the dancing firelight. He was kind, gentle. He said the past didn't matter, only what we built together. He wanted to give Samuel his name, a father's love. He was a good man, Sawyer said sincerely. Samuel was fortunate to have him, even for a short time. Stella nodded, her eyes reflecting the flames. When Thomas wrote to Yates about Samuel, he meant it as a bridge between brothers, a chance for Yates to know his son without obligation or expectation. I never imagined Yates would use that knowledge as he did. Greed changes people, Sawyer observed quietly. Makes them see relationships as transactions, people as possessions. What will happen to him, Stella asked. To Yates. The sheriff will hold him until authorities from Boston can retrieve him and the documents, Sawyer explained. From what those papers showed, he's been systematically defrauding the family company for years. I imagine he'll face serious charges. Stella was silent for a moment, absorbing this. And Samuel, will this affect him, the truth about his father? Sawyer reached across the space between them to take her hand. Samuel is your son. My son soon, if you'll still have me. What Ellison did doesn't define the boy any more than it defines you. And when he's older, when he asks questions about his real father, we'll tell him the truth as much as is appropriate for his age, Sawyer said simply. That his birth father made mistakes, that family is about more than blood, that he is loved, completely and unconditionally, by the people who choose to be part of his life. Tears glistened in Stella's eyes, reflecting the firelight. How did I find you, she whispered. In all the vastness of the West, how did I find someone like you? Sawyer smiled, remembering their first meeting in Fincher's general store. You were going to trade your hair for bread, he reminded her. And I couldn't bear the thought of those honey-gold strands falling to the floor. She laughed softly, reaching up to touch her hair, which hung loose around her shoulders in the firelight. My vanity almost got the better of me that day. I nearly walked out rather than accept your help. I'm glad you didn't, Sawyer said, his voice rough with emotion. I'm glad you took a chance on a rough cowhand with nothing to offer but honest work and a place at the table. You offered far more than that, Stella corrected him gently. You offered respect when I expected pity, friendship when I expected judgment, love when I'd stopped believing it was possible. The distance between them seemed suddenly unbearable. Sawyer moved to sit beside her, drawing her close against the cooling night air. I stopped believing too, he admitted. After losing so much, it seemed safer not to care, not to hope. You changed that, Stella. You and Samuel showed me that the frontier doesn't have to mean isolation, that even here, especially here, connection matters. She turned her face up to his, the firelight gilding her features with warmth. I love you, Sawyer Nightingale. With all that I am, all that I have been, all that I will become. And I love you, Stella Ellison, he replied, his heart full to bursting. Yesterday, today, and all our tomorrows. When he kissed her, it felt like coming home at last. They returned to Diamond Creek Ranch 3 days after they had left in such desperate haste. Word of their approach spread quickly, and by the time they reached the main house, much of the ranch had gathered to welcome them. Mr. Porter on the porch, Cookie by the cookhouse door, and the hands emerging from the barn and bunkhouse. Samuel, who had spent much of the journey processing the revelations about his parentage in his own 10-year-old way, brightened visibly at the sight of familiar faces. Look, he exclaimed, pointing toward the corral nearest the barn. Is that a pony? Indeed, a small, dappled gray pony stood in the corral, its intelligent eyes watching their approach with interest. Mr. Porter stepped forward as they drew to a halt before the main house. Figured the boy might like something of his own, he said gruffly, nodding toward the pony. Belonged to the Watson family, but their youngest outgrew him. Good-natured animal, steady, proper mount for a boy to learn on. Sawyer felt a lump form in his throat at the unexpected kindness. "That's mighty generous, sir." Porter shrugged, clearly uncomfortable with gratitude. "Ranch takes care of its own," he said simply. Then, with a significant glance at Stella, he added, "Reverend Wallace stopped by yesterday. Said to tell you the church is still available whenever you're ready." "No rush." Stella smiled, the first truly carefree expression Sawyer had seen on her face since before Ellison's arrival. "Thank you, Mr. Porter." "For everything." The foreman nodded, then turned his attention to the hands who had gathered around. "All right, show's over. Those cattle won't work themselves. Billy, take the boy to meet his pony. Miss Ellison probably wants to rest after all that traveling." As the crowd dispersed, Samuel eagerly following Billy toward the corral, Sawyer helped Stella down from the wagon. She swayed slightly on her feet, the exhaustion of the past days finally catching up with her. "Home," she murmured, looking around the familiar ranch yard. "I never thought I'd see it again." Sawyer slipped an arm around her waist, supporting her. "Let's get you to the cabin, you need rest." "Will you stay?" she asked, looking up at him. I mean just to talk, to be near. I don't think I can bear to be alone right now." "As long as you want," he promised. "I'm not going anywhere." The small cabin seemed unchanged from when they'd left it that night, though someone, probably Mrs. Porter, had placed fresh wildflowers in a jar on the table and laid clean linens on the beds. Stella sank onto the edge of her narrow bed with a sigh of relief, while Sawyer busied himself building a small fire in the stove to take the chill off the afternoon air. "What happens now?" Stella asked after a comfortable silence had stretched between them. "With the wedding, with the Wilson place." Sawyer joined her on the bed, taking her hands in his. "Whatever you want to happen," he said simply. "If you need time after everything that's occurred, we can wait. The Wilson cabin is nearly ready, but there's no rush." She shook her head. "I don't want to wait. These past days have shown me how precious time is, how quickly everything can change. I want to be your wife, Sawyer. I want us to start our life together. No more delays, no more fear." The certainty in her voice filled his heart with joy. "Then we'll speak to Reverend Wallace tomorrow. Keep it simple, just family, the ranch hands, Mr. and Mrs. Porter. And Samuel as your best man," she added with a smile. "Wouldn't have it any other way," Sawyer agreed, "though I suspect he'll be more interested in his new pony than in standing still for a ceremony." Stella laughed, the sound like music after the tension and fear of recent days. "Probably he's resilient, Sawyer. Children are. He'll have questions as he grows about Yates, about his true parentage, but with love and honesty he'll be all right." "We'll face those questions together," Sawyer promised. "All the questions, all the challenges, together." She leaned against him, her head resting on his shoulder. "Together," she echoed softly. "I like the sound of that." 3 days later, under a perfect July sky, Stella Ellison and Sawyer Nightingale were married in the small church in Dovetail Springs. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt. Stella in a new dress of pale blue that brought out the clear green of her eyes, her honey blonde hair arranged with wildflowers. Sawyer in his best clothes, freshly trimmed and groomed. And Samuel standing proudly between them, occasionally distracted by thoughts of the pony waiting back at the ranch, but mostly attentive to the solemn vows being exchanged. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Reverend Wallace declared with evident satisfaction. "You may kiss your bride." As Sawyer drew Stella into his arms for their first kiss as a married couple, cheers erupted from the small gathering. The Diamond Creek hands, the Porters, and various townsfolk who had come to witness the union that had nearly been derailed by Yates Ellison's schemes. The celebration afterward was joyful but brief, as all were eager to return to the ranch and show the newlyweds the final preparations that had been made to the Wilson cabin in their absence. To Stella and Sawyer's surprise, the hands had worked tirelessly during the days following their return, completing the repairs, adding furniture crafted by the ranch's skilled carpenter, and transforming the once-abandoned homestead into a true home. "It's beautiful," Stella breathed as they approached the cabin in early evening, the setting sun casting a golden glow over the small valley. "I can't believe how much they've done." The cabin stood welcoming and solid, with smoke curling from the stone chimney and lamplight glowing in the windows. A small porch had been added to the front, with a bench much like the one at Stella's former cabin. Behind the main structure, a barn and corral had been erected for their horses, including Samuel's new pony, Mr. Porter, who had ridden ahead with them while the others followed more slowly in wagons, cleared his throat. "Diamond Creek takes care of its own," he said again, the phrase seemingly his all-purpose expression for acts of kindness. "The north pasture is yours to run your own small herd, 20 head to start, courtesy of the ranch. You'll still draw wages for regular duties, Nightingale, but this place is yours outright. Papers are inside." Sawyer was momentarily speechless at the generosity of the gesture. A homestead, livestock, a fresh start. It was more than he had ever dared hope for when he'd first offered Stella and Samuel a place at Diamond Creek. "I don't know how to thank you," he managed finally. Porter waved away the gratitude with his characteristic gruffness. "Just be good to each other, build something lasting." "That's thanks enough." With a nod to them both, he turned his horse and rode back toward the main ranch buildings, leaving the newlyweds alone before their new home. Samuel, who had ridden double with Sawyer, slid down from the horse and ran toward the cabin with boyish enthusiasm. "Can I see my room? Is there a place for my pony? Can we stay here tonight?" Stella laughed, dismounting with Sawyer's assistance. "Yes to all of that," she told her son. "This is our home now, yours, mine, and Pa Sawyer's." The simple domestic title, Pa Sawyer, brought unexpected tears to Sawyer's eyes. How far they had come from that desperate day in Fincher's general store, when a widow had been prepared to trade her beautiful hair for bread, and a lonely cowboy had offered an alternative neither could have imagined would lead here. "Welcome home," he said softly, taking Stella's hand as they followed Samuel up the path to their new beginning. Later that night, after Samuel had exhausted himself exploring every corner of the cabin and the surrounding property, after he had fallen asleep in his new room with dreams of ponies and adventures filling his head, Stella and Sawyer sat together on the porch bench, watching the stars emerge in the vast Colorado sky. "Happy?" Sawyer asked, his arm around her shoulders, her head resting comfortably against him. "More than I ever thought possible," she replied, her voice soft with contentment. "When Thomas died, I thought that was the end of happiness for me. Just survival from then on for Samuel's sake. I never imagined this." "I know what you mean," Sawyer admitted. "After losing my family, I convinced myself that caring too much was dangerous. That the frontier was no place for deep connections, that surviving was enough." Stella turned slightly to look up at him, and now I know better," he said simply. "The frontier isn't just about survival. It's about building something meaningful in the face of hardship, finding joy despite the challenges, creating a home where before there was only wilderness. Creating a family where before there was only loneliness," Stella added softly. Sawyer nodded, tightening his arm around her. "Exactly. You and Samuel taught me that, showed me that the risk of loving is worth taking even here, especially here." The night was cool but not cold, the summer air fragrant with pine and sage. In the distance an owl called, its haunting cry a reminder of the wild nature of their surroundings. Yet here on the porch of their new home, with Stella warm against him and Samuel sleeping safely inside, Sawyer felt a profound sense of rightness, of belonging. "I used to think the West would take everything from me eventually," he said thoughtfully. "That loss was inevitable out here." "And now," Stella prompted, her hand finding his in the darkness. "Now I think the West gives as much as it takes," Sawyer replied. "It's harsh, yes, unforgiving sometimes. But it also offers freedom, possibility, a chance to define yourself by what you build rather than what you've lost." Stella nodded against his shoulder. "When I was about to cut my hair for bread, I felt as if the frontier had taken everything. My husband, our dreams, even my dignity. But then you walked in and offered another way." "Keep it," Sawyer quoted softly, remembering his own words that day. "I'll feed you both." Such a simple offer, Stella marveled. "And yet it changed everything." "For all of us," Sawyer agreed. He tilted her face up to his, marveling at how the starlight illuminated her delicate features. "I love you, Stella Nightingale. With everything I am." "And I love you, Sawyer Nightingale," she replied, her voice rich with emotion. "My protector, my partner, my home." When he kissed her beneath the vast canopy of stars, it felt like a promise, not just between the two of them, but to the frontier itself. A promise that they would face its challenges together, that they would build something lasting in its unforgiving embrace, that they would find joy and purpose in the life they created here. A life that had begun with a desperate widow, a beautiful cascade of honey-blonde hair, and a cowboy who had offered not just food but hope. A hope that had blossomed into love, into family, into a future neither could have imagined on their own. "Together," Sawyer whispered against Stella's lips. "Together," she agreed, sealing the vow with another kiss. And above them, the stars of the western sky bore witness to the promise, to the love, to the life unfolding beneath their eternal gaze.